Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and every once in a while, I need a new pincushion. And this pincushion, when I saw it, I knew I needed it. It is a dimensional sewing machine that looks just like a featherweight. So this little pincushion is a dimensional pincushion that looks like a sewing machine, and it is usable. Now, I did get my kit from the Featherweight Shop. I have the directions, I have the template shapes, which I have cut out. I have wool, ribbon, buttons, and everything that I'm going to need. I'll just need a few things additional, and we'll cover those as we go along. We could do it all by hand, or we can do some hand and machine combination. Now, we do have this beautiful black wool, and that's going to give us the machine and the machine base. This base is over top of a sponge. The size of the sponge should be 1 inch thick, 2.5 by 4.5. Now, mine's not quite that size, so I'm going to combine two together. And you can use the sponges that have that scouring area on them. It's going to give it a good base. Now, mine is not 1 inch, so I'm going to take one of those little scouring pads off. So this is going to be a base, and then I'm going to have that on top. This is the pincushion area. Now, I am going to be covering this with some wool batting. Whatever I'm going to use for the base, I do want to make sure that I am going to test so that pin is going to go in easily. They do have us use a fusible web, and if that fusible web is too thick, the pins will not go through. So be sure to test whatever you're using to make sure that goes through. So these are the things that we are going to need to cut out of the black, along with our sewing machine. And our sewing machine is going to go like this. This is the base, and this is where the needle comes out. So we're going to need 2 of these. I'm going to roughly cut out these areas and attach them to those pieces so that I have them while I'm working on them. We have a little circle. That little circle is going to be that little S, and that is going to go on our white. Under the needle, we have a little sewing plate, and that's going to go on that silver gray. For some of these steps, I'm going to be using a fusible interfacing and some just a fusible web. So the first thing I want to do is start with my machine base. And that's that little piece that's going to go on top. It is also the piece where that little machine base is going to go. So what I like to do is I like to put a fusible web on the fabric first and then cut out the shape second. Now, I'm going to be using a lightweight fusible web, and that way the pins are going to be able to go through. So I need a piece a little bit bigger, and I'm going to be able to fuse that down, and I will be using a pressing sheet. Once that fusible web has been ironed on, I'm going to trace around that little plate. Now I can cut that out. So the needle plate is prepared. I'm going to prepare the base the same way. Iron on a fusible web onto that fabric, trace around, and then cut out this shape. While we still have the paper on this, let's take the paper off of that little plate, place it down where it's going to be in the center, and then fuse that on. Once that little piece is on, we can now remove that paper from the back. From here, we could stitch this plate down. We could stitch it by hand or stitch it by machine. However you want to stitch this on is fine. I just stitched all the way around the plate with just a simple straight stitch. This now needs to be put in the middle of this base. For this piece, I am just going to put a fusible interfacing. I have a lightweight fusible interfacing that I'm going to iron on, fuse that on, and then cut out that shape. Once that's stabilized, this is going to go in the center. Now, of course, this could be another color, or your base could be another color. Center it in, fuse that on, and then stitch the base down. I did have some gold thread from Metler that I used to stitch around, and I did a decorative stitch on my machine. Now, I do have a Bernina 790, and this is stitch 129. I now need this base to fit the sponges. And I did want to add some batting over top, so I'm going to make sure that is going to fit. And then one more test, just to make sure. I did trim those edges off just so that it'd be nice and neat. And I do have that scrubby on the bottom. I'm going to glue these layers together. I'm going to put a little bit of glue in these two areas, on the top and in between the layers. And that's just going to help it not slide over when I get to work on it. Put a little glue to hold these edges down, and I can put a couple of pins just to hold that until it dries. And we can work on our sewing machine. The sewing machine does need to be done in 2 pieces. And this is the area where the sewing machine needle is coming out. But I do want to stabilize this, and I'm going to use a fusible interfacing. I'm going to lay those templates on top of that interfacing so that they're reverse. I will be stitching this like this, and I'm going to stitch it before I cut it out. Before I do that, I do have a little S template that I get to put on the machine. So we have this tiny little circle. I have let my machine do the S for me. I'm going to put a little bit of a fusible web on the back. Now I could trace out that shape and cut out my S. I do want to put my little S on my machine before I sew these together. So to figure out where they're going to go, I'm going to place my pieces. So the needle's coming out here. This is the machine, and this is the area that I'm going to be looking at. So my S is going to be there. So I'm going to lay this out, make sure both sides are facing, slip that machine out, give it a check. Now I can put that there, fuse it there, and do a little stitch all the way around. My little S is done. This is where I know it's going to go. I'm going to place this underneath and flip it over so I know this is in the right place. I'm going to line it up and trace around this template. I'm just going to put a line where my needle goes, and I'm going to mark these 2 little notches. These little notches are stopping and starting points where I'm going to stitch. Now I'm going to fold the fabric together so the right sides are touching and pin. Now I'm going to stitch, and I'm going to stitch just a little bit in past that drawn line because that is actually the cut line. So I'm going to start stitching here, go all the way around. Where I have this needle, I'm just going to skip over just a little bit with my machine so I have a space. Then continue stitching and back stitch. I only need the tiniest little seam. Once that inside stitching is done, I'm going to be able to cut out on those lines. Now I can turn this right side out. And there's the machine with these 2 little flaps. So that little base is going to get stitched down here, but we need to fill it first. So it's very, very firm, and that batting comes right here to that edge. Now we're going to open up those flaps and stitch that down. And this area we will definitely need to hand stitch down. So I've stitched that on, so when it sits, it's nice and firm. Well, this is easy to work on. We're going to be able to put in the sewing machine needle. If you don't want to use a machine needle, you could use a toothpick. So that machine is now ready to go on top of that sponge. When it sits on, there's going to be a little bit that is going to wrap around. Now I want to machine stitch just these little corners and not this piece. So I just need to measure and put a mark where I know I'm going to stop. And that'll be the same for all corners. So I'm going to put those together and do a tiny little row of stitching and leave that flap open. So it's just a little row of stitching and that flap is out. Now I can turn that out and place that on top of my sponge. Now we have the bottom to work on. Now you could glue that bottom down, but I'm going to do some stitching so that these ends are all pulled together. So those threads have just tightened up that bottom for me. Tuck in those corners and try to make this as flat as I can on the bottom. To make this bottom really flat, I'm just going to take a little piece of batting about that size and place it there. But I'm going to put some fusible interfacing on that and trim it out to the right size. I'm going to put it on, and you can use a blanket stitch or a whip stitch, whatever you'd like, to sew that base on. Now if that needle has worked its way up, all I have to do is just give it a little squeeze and it's going to pop its little head down. From here, we're going to be able to embellish it. I will put a little bit of glue right inside here to hold that needle in the right position. The kit came with this little spool, so the spool can just be put on with a straight pin, but I would glue each area. I did color my spool with a brown marker and I put gold thread on it. We do have some additional buttons that we can put on for the wheel and a measuring tape that we can put along the bottom. I happen to have a vintage button that I am going to put here, and for the tension disc I have a little silver snap, so I'm just going to glue those on. My little featherweight machine is now done. I could add a little piece of fabric in, which was included, or decorate it any way that I would like. The main thing is it sits and it's usable. This has been a fun project. I love the way it looks. It really does look like my little featherweight. I'll put some links in the description so that you can check it out. And as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. And be sure to make every day a Sewtacular day. Bye for now.